Comme je descendais des fleuves impassibles, je ne me sentis plus guidé par les haleurs. Des peaux rouges criards les avaient pris pour cible, les ayant cloués nus aux poteaux de couleur. J'étais insoucieux de tous les équipages, porteurs de blé flamand ou de cotons anglais. Quand avec mes haleurs on finit ces tapages, les fleuves m'ont laissé descendre où je voulais.
Welcome to the heart and soul of a house, the house of Taittinger. Bubbles, poetic moments, historical memories, a family spirit. What should I call you? Pierre-Emmanuel, rather than Mr. Taittinger?
Pierre-Emmanuel.
Pierre-Emmanuel, if you like.
Pierre-Emmanuel Taittinger is a poet at heart, and Rimbaud is his hero.
Toute ma vie, j'ai été quelqu'un de rêveur. Je suis un rêveur.
All my life I've been a dreamer, absolutely. An active dreamer, but still a dreamer. My mother, Corinne, was born in the Ardennes to a family of industrialists who dedicated their time not to industry, but to art and painting. So my mother was raised in a very artistic environment in Charleville, which is the hometown of Arthur Rimbaud. In my early childhood, my mother introduced us to poetry, and I've always greatly appreciated the gift she gave to me. I have to say that poetry has always been at the heart of my professional life. Well, poetry and dreaming. From my father I learned, or inherited, a real sense of duty because the family was heavily involved in politics and business. So in that sense, I certainly embodied two personalities who cohabit as best as possible. But the appreciation of poetry is fabulous, because it lets you wander far away while never really going anywhere. It gives you perspective, it elevates you, it takes you away from everyday people and things. In any case, I was born into a world of poetry thanks to my mother, and I plan on remaining there for the rest of my life. At the beginning of my professional life, I often traveled to Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa. While there is a lot of industry and commerce in Europe and the United States, and a great number of extremely organized and scientific countries, but Africa is an invaluable source of poetry that I think will prove increasingly beneficial in tomorrow's world. So I enhanced my love of poetry, or at least the inclination for it in any case, with visits to delightful and stunning regions which had that special kind of humanity only to be found in Africa. It submerses you, especially when night falls and the lights come on, when the world becomes nothing but shadow upon shadow. All of this is an enchanting poetic ambiance. But it's true that poetry does not necessarily lead to academic excellence, because poetry is evasion. It means straying from working to be top of the class or ahead of others. I have always been that boy at the back of the class, close to the radiator, losing focus after 5 minutes to escape into daydreaming.
On a dessiné au tableau un rectangle. Veux-tu me calculer le périmètre de ce rectangle?
Il faut chercher le demi-périmètre, c'est-à-dire 50 mètres.
And then, on top of everything else, my mother did something wonderful. At the age of 6.5, she sent me to a boarding school with only 20 students, a bit like the free children at the Summerhill School. Summerhill was an experimental school in England where children were sent to study under very different and experimental teaching methods. And I was in a similar school called the Institut de Truxeur in the Oise region. We studied French and grammar, geography and history in the morning, but the afternoon was devoted to chasing butterflies or raising frogs or building huts. And I think that's the experience that was the final step that rooted me in an enchanting, poetic world where I've lived ever since.
When did you first encounter Arthur Rimbaud?
My first encounter with Rimbaud was through my mother. Throughout my childhood, poems were written on the walls of our house. She wrote on the walls everywhere, and so my childhood was steeped in a focus on poetry. Not only Rimbaud, although my mother adored Rimbaud, but also Louis Aragon, Apollinaire, Baudelaire. I was very susceptible to this. My brothers and sisters as well, certainly, but I think myself a little bit more than the others. Rimbaud has always been a part of my life. I think my mother resembles Rimbaud in her creative genius, but hers is more of a pictorial genius. She has created an extraordinary and significant body of work. By the way, I would have liked to have shown you her work, and it will certainly be displayed once she has left us. But my mother is quite a character. She paints extremely well, she writes extremely well, but she's now quite advanced in age. She also has impeccable taste, and this has always influenced me because she was in that world. So poetry has always been the connection between her and me. For her, Rimbaud was the bleak landscape of the Ardennes, an invitation to travel. And we speak often of Rimbaud and his mother and sister. His mother in Charleville was very conventional, a devout Catholic, almost a fundamentalist, his sister Isabel as well. However, Rimbaud adored his first sister Vitalie, who died young, and his mother's name was Vitalie as well. Of course, this greatly influenced the choice of names for my eldest daughter. But Rimbaud represents absolute genius. Absolute genius is Rimbaud's Le Bateau Ivre.
La tempête a béni mes éveils maritimes. Plus léger qu'un bouchon, j'ai dansé sur les flots, qu'on appelle le rouleur éternel de victimes, 10 nuits, sans regretter l'œil niais des falots.
Rimbaud is, for me, above all, an inaccessible character, because Rimbaud was the type who was always at the head of his class, first prize in Latin verse, first prize in Greek verse, recipient of the Excellence Award for several years. I have to admit that his genius comes in part from an incredible literary education, so that is somewhat unattainable point for me. But the dreams I have nurtured are not connected to him. That's my own nature. I think I have always known I've been a dreamer, ever since early childhood. It's the countryside in particular that taught me to dream, more so than Rimbaud. Rimbaud came to me when I was already 12 or 13, when I was reading Le Grand Moulin, Diane Lanster, a novel by Jean-Didier Wolfram that I really liked, Tristan and Isolde, or other literary works. No, poetry came much earlier, in the way that I had dreamed as a child in the country. I came to know Africa much more through Champagne and my personal vision of Africa when I was young than through Rimbaud. It's not the life of Rimbaud after he left France to go to Harare in Ethiopia that really inspired me. I was more inspired back then by the writings of Saint-Exupéry. What inspired me about Rimbaud's life was his time in Charleville, when he was in a dark and somber environment in the Ardennes where night falls early. Back when he was bored, had nothing to do, and when he imagined a world that was inaccessible to him at that time, and he had to dream and build himself. He did not write his great poems in the wide open spaces that he visited afterwards. He wrote them in Charleville, while sitting in school at night at a writing desk with an inkwell. That is when Rimbaud wrote. Not after having wandered and experienced the world, or when he traveled, when he became an arms dealer, when he did business deals from the back of a camel or a horse. There he was no longer writing. It's extremely complicated to put oneself in the mindset to write a poem.
Do you write any yourself?
I write poetic notes when I'm addressing other people. I never write a poem without it being connected to a person I love, or don't love. But I have realized that when I do write to someone, there's a good chance it will be very poetic. But then again, there are many poets who do not write. You could never write a word and still have an extremely poetic soul. I think this is more the case with me. But I'm not worried. I'm not a genius. I have no concerns about my posterity. In that I'm like my father. I have no desire for glory. I want simply to disappear in the dazzle of sparkling champagne.
Je n'ai aucune envie de gloire, aucune envie de... J'ai envie de disparaître dans la pétillance des bulles de champagne.